Welcome everybody to another episode of IT Trendsetters. Very excited. I'm your guest host, Nick, today. Our normal host, Mr. Chris Lee, is vacationing right now on an island, so he can't be with us, but we're super excited to have some amazing guests today. We'll go ahead and do introductions first and get that out of the way before we dive right into some really topical trends in IT Trendsetters. So let's start with Lonnie. Who are you? Who are you from? And anything else of interest you want to share with us?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, my name is Lonnie Best. I'm a manager of detection and response services here at Rapid7. I basically lead one of our world-class teams of analysts in our flagship SOC here in Arlington, Virginia. We do a follow the sun model for our MDR services. So we have SOCs here in Arlington, Dublin, Ireland, and Melbourne, Australia. So I'm just been with Rapid7 for a little over 5 years now. Started off as an analyst in the SOC, have a background, working for IT managed services providers, and a little bit of background in physical security as well. So I've been doing security for over a decade. I'm happy to be here and talk about some of these, trends that we've been seeing here in MDR and in the industry as a whole.
Awesome. Well, welcome. And Kirk.
I'm Kirk. I'm generally the co-host here of our IT Trendsetters and interviewing all kinds of leading industry experts like Lonnie here. And hopefully we'll have some good, insightful conversation to share with you.
Awesome. Well, guys, as we record this, not to put it too many timestamps on this, but it is we're recording around the end of the year for 2022, and we're looking ahead at 2023. So I guess, maybe we'll start off with, is there any trends that you think that or key learnings from 2022 that we should really take into account as we go into the new year relative to IT cybersecurity?
Lonnie, I'll let you give your insight there, and we'll.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big things is, as always, is please enable multi-factor authentication. So, as we looked back across all of the incident response engagements for what we consider a high severity incident, so not your basic run-of-the-mill stuff, commodity malware landing on an endpoint doesn't go anywhere further. You isolate it, get rid of it, whatever. The actual high severity breaches that we've dealt with in our managed detection response service and in conjunction with our incident response team at Rapid7, really, I think about 40%, it's about 38% of the incidents that we dealt with over the course of 2022 resulted from a root cause of not having multi-factor authentication enabled on public-facing services. So, whether it's your cloud services, SaaS, VPN, whatever, the ultimate result of that was a high-severity breach. A threat actor getting in the environment and doing some really nefarious things to where we had to engage our actual incident response team to come in and serve as incident managers on those cases. That is absolutely top of mind. Please, it's not something that is a nice to have anymore. It really is something that you cannot overlook. And if you have exposed services, you need to be enabling two-factor or multi-factor authentication on those services. The other top ones were, exposed devices, right? Like anything on the edge, patch it, right? Exchange servers, Citrix NetScaler gateways, FortiGate firewalls, whatever it is, if it touches the internet, keep it patched, because those are the things that threat actors are really going after these days. So,
all right, on the front of MFA, what about the poorly implemented MFA, though, leading to problems too? How do you protect against that?
Yeah. So don't use SMS, of course. That's a big thing. Our threat actor is going to be able to get in there and steal your session cookies and reuse them. Yes, that's something that we're going to probably continue to see. But again, that's something that just enabling the basics is going to keep most threat actors out. They're going to move on to the next easy target. If they get that push, they're probably going to move along. If you're a really juicy target, they might do some of that additional stuff, trying to steal your cookies and using that information to do relay attacks. But for the most part, having it enabled to begin with is going to prevent the vast majority of breaches.
What do you tell people, though, that say it's just too much work? It's too hard. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so that's probably going to segue into a little bit about what we want to talk to with the industry as a whole, and having managed services providers, kind of there to partner with and assist you. But I mean, ultimately, it's yes, it may be difficult to employ, but in general, these days it's free. A lot of services offer it for free. You just have to put the work in to do it. If you care about your business operations and wanting to stay out of the news and protect your customers, or your employees, it's not a question. You cannot just rest back and say, oh, we're not a high priority target. Nobody wants to come after us because we're a small to medium sized business and operating in the middle of nowhere in the world. It's just not the case anymore. If it's exposed to the internet, if threat actors can access it, they're going to. So it's an absolute must.
What about I know there's these services out there now the bad guys use, like identity brokers, will actually guarantee you a valid account in a customer for an amount of money. How do you go about limiting what they can get to and identifying them? I know that a lot of shift in the industries, you must be able to detect quickly when something does happen, because for usability perspective, if you act too quickly, a lot of, you don't want to be cut, the usability will go to nothing if every time somebody clicks on something, you block them. So you have to kind of watch closely and react quickly. So how do you see that all shifting now that, like I said, you can have valid users and they're living off the land, so to speak, and how do you identify those types of people?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And there's kind of a couple components to that. Having a good threat intelligence partner is probably going to be one of the answers to that. Identifying early stages of when, an identity is leaked or being for sale in the dark web, deep dark web. That's stuff that you definitely want to, kind of be abreast of. But, the flip side of that is, okay, well, when that gets sold and someone utilizes it, they've identified that as a valid account. Having a good partner in place who can identify, what is an actual threat actor doing, and then be able to respond to that, to effectively detect and respond to that initial threat in order to eradicate, the threat actor as soon in the attack chain as possible. Most organizations, from what we see, are struggling with that. Manpower is something that a lot of organizations don't have, especially as we're facing sort of an economic downturn. Having the ability to pay a full-time staff to be able to perform all of these security functions it's increasingly difficult. And many times outsourcing that to someone who does have the capability to do it for you or in conjunction with you, as a true partner is something that's, increasingly imperative.
What do you think about, and I know Rapid7 is kind of right in the middle of this, but the industry has been kind of reinventing itself over and over again. A lot of people manage SIMs, and then you've got the XDRs, the EDRs, the NDRs, calling, very similar type things. And then SOAR, which is another piece of kind of a XDR, I would argue. So where do you kind of see this today, and where do you see it headed with all these different potential ways of solving this same problem?
Yeah, it is a tough problem to solve, right? And then understanding and differentiating between what is, an MDR versus MSSP versus MEDR, throw in the X in there and the XDR space or whatever. Differentiating between those services is often very difficult. So having a good understanding about like what each of those can do for you, and then how can you engage with someone to partner on that is something that's very important. An MDR provider is going to be, and that's what we do at Rapid7 today. We've been in the business of MDR since 2015. We also have had a quote unquote XDR solution that we built the managed service on top of since that time. So our Inside IDR is a SIM, but it also incorporates an endpoint agent component. So really, we were XDR before XDR was cool, I guess we like to put it. And we built our managed service around that because, realizing that you need to be able to pull in all the data sources, not just from specifically like an endpoint, right? Or not just from your firewalls or network devices, but having that holistic view of what's going on is very important. But having a good understanding of what your partner is able to do for you, and especially early on in the game, not when a breach is happening, but when you first, go shopping for a solution, a managed services partner, is something that you want to be aware of, because understanding where does that managed service stop in the detection and response cycle and what are they going to be able to do for you, right? Like a managed detection response service is not going to be going in generally putting firewall rules in, or doing updates on your devices or whatever, whereas an MSSP partner might be able to do something like that for you. An MDR service really should have the expertise to be able to look at what's right and what's not right across lots of different event sources in your environment, and be able to effectively alert you to when those things are going wrong, and B, respond. One of the things we did at Rapid7 several years ago is we baked in our incident response service into the managed service because we recognized that those precious minutes count. And so having that understanding of where does that provider start and stop, and where do you need to now engage with maybe another third-party service, maybe you have an incident response retainer, however that might go, understanding that early on before you have a breach is very important in that regard.
Okay, and then I know Rapid7 believes in the security partnerships. Where does the platform play in, and where do you need partnerships to enhance platforms? Everybody like to do everything, but it's that's a tough ask.
That's kind of a loaded question. So the platform, is built. Our Insight platform and consists of things like Insight IDR, our SIM solution, Insight Vulnerability Management, Insight VM, for the sort of the proactive, risk management and vulnerability management services. You've got Insight CloudSec for the cloud security posture management. It's all of these things kind of baked together into a platform, and then where do the service components come in on top of that? And at Rapid7, we've built out multiple of those. So we have ones for managed detection response, managed vulnerability management, managed AppSec for your application scanning and security, and we're continuously looking to incorporate more of those in there. We acquired a company for threat intelligence services. Threat Command is the new platform. The company was Insights, but we acquired them to help with the threat intelligence piece, that holistic looking out across the dark web, and sort of brand management, protection, things of that nature. But again, is anybody really in the industry doing it right at this point? I don't necessarily think that Rapid7 probably is, and we're continuously working, listening to our customer base to understand, where can we bridge those gaps between the platform and the services, and how to enhance both simultaneously. So like, for instance, our managed detection response service today is feeding into the platform based around, how we do our jobs, the things that an analyst actually needs to do their jobs effectively is feeding into the platform, and then customers are now, even if they don't have a managed component, are now seeing enhancements to the platform to where it can help them more effectively detect and respond to breaches in their own environment without having necessarily that managed component.
Let me ask you a question.
We're also at a tipping point here with all the different risk management tools, and then the insurance tools, and what are the insurance companies looking for a client to actually get affordable or even get cyber insurance? I saw one of the big insurance companies, Zurich, something that it's not even going to be insurable at some parts of cyber insurance. So what is Rapid7 seeing with the insurance companies, and what are they mandating, and how's that? What do you see that? How's that coming? Where's that headed?
Yeah, so that's one of the key things that's been on my mind as of late. And when we're engaging with potential new customers, one of the things that we often see is requirements that are being laid out by their cyber insurance providers, right? Excuse me. So their cyber insurance providers are, you brought up Zurich, which is really recent one, where they said basically it's cyber insurance is going to be untenable in the future. The underwriters are not effectively able to account for all of the attacks that are going on, right? Sort of similar to natural disasters. You can't always predict when natural disasters are going to occur, and the outcomes of that to critical infrastructure can be huge. And the same goes for cyber attacks. We're increasingly seeing different critical infrastructure sectors, such as medical, as finance, which has long been targeted, but especially now are like energy sectors being targeted increasingly, and it is increasingly insecure. And one of the things that these cyber insurance providers are starting to kind of realize is, if we're going to insure this organization that we're partnering with here, they have to be meeting basic minimum requirements. And what I have seen increasingly is one of those basic minimum requirements being something along the lines of you have someone monitoring your logs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What does that even mean? I don't know. It's not something that can actually happen. But when you have verbiage like that, that's why we're increasingly seeing customers move to the managed services sector to try to offload some of that, because again, they cannot reasonably do it themselves in-house. They do have to do all the patching updates. They do have to phone up the user and ask them, hey, are you traveling in this other country right now? They've got a lot of tasks that they're expected to perform. Monitoring logs 24/7 is not something they can't. So having a partner who can effectively pull in all of those logs, because you do want to retain all of that data, so that you can go back and, for instance, use SolarWinds as an incident or as an example. You can go back 9 months and search for indicators of compromise in your environment. You want to collect all that, but you also want somebody who has the knowledge and understanding of how to use that data to effectively detect and respond to threats, right? So you kind of get the best of both worlds, but a lot of the cyber insurance providers are kind of effectively mandating that you, in some instances, actually, they are mandating that you outsource your security to someone else. And that's, I think that's just going to continue to, be a theme that we're going to see going into 2023, especially as cash-strapped organizations, including these insurance providers, are going to, require more, bang for the buck when you fail to do the thing that you're supposed to do.
Sure. What about the role of like frameworks and helping the effectiveness of like a Rapid7, which has arguably the most comprehensive set of security between the vulnerability management, the application management, and XDRs? Not many of the players cross all those boundaries like you do with your own platform, right? A lot of them might try and manage somebody else's for everything, and that seems to be a strategic advantage. You generally have, like typical commercial customers, you work them towards a framework for making sure you have the control set right. If you don't collect the logs, it's hard to alert on them, those types of things. So what can the customer expect when they start out with Rapid7 to increase their security posture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the primary things that we do, of course, we have a lot of different teams looking at a lot of different things to determine, like what is the best fit, right? What should you be sending? When customers onboard, they go through an onboarding process that includes looking at, sort of the most sort of strategic event sources that you want to feed in order to collect the most relevant security data. And then as they partner with our customer advisor team, in our managed detection response and MVM and MAS services, they're going to continuously work with them on a month-to-month basis, or however often they're meeting, to identify maybe some of those gaps. One of the things that we actually did recently, going back to what I mentioned earlier about the most common threat vector that we identified throughout the course of 2022 leading to major incidents, we took the data that we had across our customer base, and we used our threat hunting model. So our SOC goes and performs hypothesis-driven threat hunting initiatives on a monthly basis. And anytime something comes up that is of interest, we go and kind of search across all of our customer bases for any of this type of relevant activity. They took that and actually used that model to try to identify, okay, which customers of ours out there are they have a supported event source for a multi-factor authentication solution, an Okta, a Duo, whatever it might be. They looked at the relevant log sets that they could search across, and then did sort of a gap analysis of let's identify who has this event source but isn't actually sending us any of these logs. And things, things of that nature to help identify where are our customers not necessarily failing, but maybe not knowing what they're missing, and then we can then help them identify those gaps, increase their the types of events that they're feeding in, and help them close those gaps essentially. So it's something that you generally want to do a sort of a risk management kind of approach, but we're actually, like I said, we're using the security modeling that we do, the threat hunting, the investigations that our analysts perform to even help, sort of quicken up, and identify those, because you've got thousands of customers. Your customer advisors are working with them on a regular basis, but they don't always know exactly what the customer is missing, and the customer doesn't even always know what they're missing. But we can use data sets like this to try to help them identify that.
Great. So you said obviously the lack of MFA is a big issue. What were some of the other leading causes behind the lack of MFA?
Yeah, so the lack of MFA, like I said, was about 40% of those root causes of those high severity incidents. About 35% was, I mentioned earlier, exploitation of vulnerabilities in edge-facing devices. So those are some of the best, most celebrity vulnerabilities that come out, or unauthenticated remote code execution on an edge device. I very, very well recall the year 2020 and Citrix NetScaler being having a new vulnerability. It seemed like every week, and we were seeing customer environments popped because of those vulnerabilities. But from there, for our major incidents, really, like you see a drastic drop. So that's close to 80% of all root causes being lack of MFA on external facing applications or devices, and then exploitation of sort of celebrity vulnerabilities or whatever, unpatched vulnerabilities. From there, you can probably guess what the next one is. Phishing. Of course, it's phishing. That's always going to be in it. And that's another key reason why MFA is so important, because someone phishes you and gets your credentials. Generally, if you've got MFA enabled, they're not going to be able to reuse those effectively. Again, if you are a target, if this is a whaling type attack or something of that nature, yeah, they might spend the extra time to do some additional things to get that. But more likely than not, they're going to just move on. And so those are really the top 90% of things that we saw. For our minor incidents, it's across the board. We see a lot of phishing attacks. We see a lot of, some of the commodity malware that's going around this year, a lot of Raspberry Robin, Bootloader, CACBot, Quackbot, whatever you want to call it. Which I say commodity malware. I mean, that's not to say that these things aren't being used and leveraged by threat actors to then subsequently come in and cause havoc later on and put ransomware into an environment. We have seen a little bit of that, but in general, those are a lot of probably the top 6 things that we're seeing across our customer environments from what I've seen.
Let me ask you a question for both you guys. Like, as you go into 2023, how do you see the weaponization of AI taking place into all this?
Like ChatGPT is a big thing right now.
That's my next question for you.
That's a great question. I don't really have a good answer for it. I've not dug enough into the bad side of ChatGPT and things like it. I will say that it's doing great things on the defensive side. We've seen a pretty good uses for creating documentation, for how to do investigative processes, maybe like even generating shell templates for different types of malware families, or commodity stuff that you see on a regular basis. You can kind of use it to draft up a really great report and save time, for the defender. Excuse me, but
I think it's beyond just ChatGPT, though. I think it's
yes, of course.
It's the deepfakes. There's a lot of of new AI tools out there that are just, popping up left and right.
Yes.
Especially even in the crypto world, right? Like, that's a whole different ballgame. But like, do you see that as a trend that will continue in 2023?
Absolutely, on both fronts, right? Using AI and machine learning to both infiltrate environments, and I think that, in my own personal opinion, more of if you think about things like deep fakes and things like that, information operations and information warfare, like those things are going to be continue to be used by threat actors, particularly probably nation state threat actors, to sow dissent rather, and plant disinformation. That's going to be something that's going to be heavily utilized. And again, as well as, sort of for text-based things, the bots are going to continue doing their thing. If you can have them more effectively craft things in manners that sound convincing, that's great. But we're also using a lot of this stuff on the defensive side to do things like reduce signal to noise ratio, help our defenders out to identify, maybe both reduce signal to noise, but also elevate things that are more likely to be something that's malicious that maybe an analyst, for instance, would have to look at for an extended period of time, do a little bit of digging. If we use these ML models to say, hey, this matches pretty closely to a relative degree of confidence, something that's likely to be malicious, we can then raise that up. That's something we're doing at Rapid7 and MDR. We have our data science team working alongside us. I'll actually be meeting with them here right after this call, to go over the past weeks, of events. But using that data to get the best information in front of our defenders faster is something that's absolutely helping out the industry on sort of blue team side. So I think we're going to see an increase in both in the coming year as a lot of these platforms become better at what they're doing.
I guess I'm curious too, is if there's the new, crime as a service offerings that are, the criminals are actually, soliciting companies to help them get into the market, right? Does it even reinforce why managed services are so much more important, right? I mean, it's not, trying to let people know it's not these one-off attacks. The reason why managed services work is because you have to literally be on paying attention all the time, not just, hey, I'm going to just set something up, set it and forget it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too that a managed service can help provide in that regard, is the visibility, right? Because we're seeing things across dozens of industry verticals, thousands of different customer environments, and you can identify where threat actors, a lot of the time what customers want to kind of focus on and they have an interest in and say, well, what are you seeing in my industry vertical? And the approach that we tend to take is more holistic. We're looking at things from the perspective of what are threat actors actually doing when they gain access to an environment. What are the types of things they're doing? Because they tend to transcend industry verticals. What is the impact? The impact is always going to be different based on that vertical. What is their goal? That's going to be different. But the way that they're doing things and the way that you can identify them early in the attack chain is generally going to be the same. But because of the visibility that we have, for a good example that we have is we had multiple incident response engagements, major incidents, I should say, where we had a particular threat actor doing, they had a certain set of TTPs that they would do, they would perform whenever they got into an environment, and we identified that they were a likely access broker. They were targeting information once they got into that environment related to financials. They were creating accounts in the Active Directory environment that were, pseudo, somebody in finance, for instance. That would be the title that they would give them. And we tracked them across using OSINT, using some other sources to identify as they were trying to change their TTP, and then identify them subsequently in other environments. And that's just one of those things that if you're solely focused on what's happening in your environment, you may miss a lot of this. And that's where managed services can really also help come into play because of the breadth of things that we get to see and deal with. It can really help you as a singular, customer protect your environment because of just that additional visibility. Whereas you trying to deal with something like that on your own, you might be missing it. So,
what do you think? How critical going forward here is, for lack of better term, the multi-SIM environments? Not only to keep repeating from data all over the place, but like using Microsoft Sentinel for Microsoft and then feeding your stuff, versus getting it direct. How do you see the architecture evolving here? For customers to get the information they need in a timely fashion, yet keep the cost of moving data around also in line.
Yeah, that one's a tough one, I think. To use an example of Microsoft Sentinel, we're currently undergoing an evaluation essentially of how we can incorporate things like, we've been doing Office 365 event sources like
right.
that, but we're trying to incorporate additional third-party sources like Microsoft Defender for Cloud, which is pulling from all of these things that you're already paying extra money in many cases to get that data, to send it, and it's going to this one console. And now, like you said, you're asking you want us to now push it into another console so that we can see it. It's not an easy answer. I think that one of the benefits that we have, at least at Rapid7, with a unified solution, having all that pulled into one platform, is we do have the visibility to be able to see across all of these different event sources. If you're solely relying on something like logging into your Microsoft Sentinel console, or you're logging into your EDR console, or whatever, all these disparate solutions, you're putting additional overhead. And so it does benefit you to send that data to somewhere that's centralized, even if it is an extra cost for the data. One of the things that we do is at Rapid7, we don't charge for any of that data. You pay one flat fee, and we basically say, please give us everything that you have, because as security professionals, it is imperative for us to have that data to be able to correlate across things, to be able to determine if something is a true positive, if you will, or something that's basically benign. We started off with the managed detection response service ingesting all process start events, for instance, and storing all of those process start events from all of our endpoints that we were monitoring. Whereas in the product previously, that wasn't something that was a function. And we did it because we realized that we need that data. We need to be able to do process ID walking and trace things back to where they actually came from. We over time released that to our product base as an additional solution, and we're continuing to basically bring that to the masses, just as a singular example. But having the data enables us to do our jobs effectively. If you don't have that data, you might not be able to do it. So yes, how do you solve like the whole problem of having to do all of these additional data sources and pay the additional fees to get the new logging? I think that everybody's going to continue to try to drive things to their own solution, right? Like, we want you to use our solution. Microsoft wants you to use their solution. But I just will say that if you can get the data and you can retain it, and it's within your budget, please do it. I don't care what solution you're using; it's going to benefit you down the road. Whenever again, going back to the SolarWinds breach, whenever something like that happens that dates back 9 months, you need to be able to effectively search through that data. And so if you can get it, please get it.
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting world. All these, let's call them infrastructure platform people, whether it's like a Palo Alto, a Fortinet, or even a CrowdStrike, they all want you to kind of use their platform, but generally, none of those have over a 30% market share. So you probably wouldn't go buy a Palo Alto or a CrowdStrike if you didn't use their tool, right?
Exactly.
So
yeah.
I think there's an inherent advantage to not necessarily trying to rely on those tools for everything, but that gets into this multi-SIM world a little bit, so it's a.
Yeah, and that goes back to, like I said, like we like to say we were XDR before XDR was cool, because we've been doing it longer than pretty much anybody else in the industry. You have pure play EDR and then managed EDR now getting into the SIM world. We're not an EDR solution. Let me be very clear. Our endpoint agent has some capabilities to do quarantining of assets and things like that, but we always recommend you have a multi-layered approach. Have EDR, next gen AV, make sure you have those firewalls and whatnot. Also deploy our endpoint agent so we have that visibility, so that when things slip through the cracks, you've got something to fall back on, and then of course that log retention is key. But having a multi sort of tenancy approach, I guess, if you want to call it that, being able to ingest logs from all of these different tools, parse them out, and search them, and then of course that retention component of it is really the way to go. So again, not trying to necessarily plug Rapid7, just as these different vendors are trying to solve those problems, that's something that you start to face, right? Is the ability to bring in all of these additional event sources to be able to paint the broadest picture of any sort of security incident, or to say there was no incident, right? Like if you don't have the data, you're not really necessarily going to say one way or the other. So you need to have it there.
So if you had to go out on the limb for 2023, what do you think we'll see? What kind of a new paradigm of attack, or what don't we know? We don't know at this point.
Yeah, I honestly, I'm going to have to, based on my experience in the industry, is we're going to see a lot of the same. We're going to see continued attacks against whatever services have single factor authentication. We're going to see continued attacks against those edge devices that have new vulnerabilities disclosed. That's actually from what I've seen for the last 2 years now, and it's probably going to continue in 2023, has really been the big thing. The mass exploitation of those devices is something that threat actors are really, they're taking it on. It's because it's easy. It's one of those things, there's kind of a joke in the industry at this point. They're like, whenever one of these new edge device vulnerabilities come out, the first thing you start looking for is deployment of Bitcoin miners, because once they can mass do something, that's what they're going to do. And then you start seeing the sort of targeted approaches from more prolific threat actors coming in after the fact, because they are being a little bit more targeted in their approach, but they're still using those same easy access types of exploitation, I guess.
And you have some background, obviously, in the OT and the IoT world too. So what do you think? Where do you think that's going to lead with all these devices proliferating all over the place, as well as OT, which is more contained?
Yeah, so OT is one of the worlds where we're starting to dip our toes into in MDR. Rapid7 has a partnership with a company called SCADAfence, who provides essentially it's a network monitoring solution for ICS OT environments. And we're starting to utilize that a bit more, but really, it is what is in the news nowadays, right? Critical infrastructure heavily relies on OT, ICS, SCADA, IoT, IOMT, all of these acronyms that you want to throw out there. They're heavily reliant upon these, and in most of these cases, these are devices that are sitting in networks that cannot be patched effectively. You take them down for any amount of time, you may risk millions of dollars of revenue for an organization. They, over the years, have become increasingly exposed to the internet, especially as vendors, have wanted to be able to access them remotely to do things like patching or, provide firmware updates or whatever. But because of that, go on Shodan and just do a quick search for ICS or SCADA, and the things that you're going to see honestly should scare you. And I think that that's going to be an increasing focus for players in the traditionally IT security industry are increasingly get involved in that, because where are threat actors generally going? They gain access to the IT environment, and they're going to now increasingly target the OT environment. They're going to try to pivot their way into there, and we generally have lack of visibility there, so we don't know what they're doing.
You're not loading any agents on those types of devices.
Unfortunately, we're not able to do that, and that's one of the problems, right? So it's again that layered approach and feeding all of that data in. In some cases, having these sort of pure play ICS OT solutions are going to become more necessary, but just doing basics, taking things like, feeding logs from your data historians in to your SIM solution, doing things like employing agents where they can, because in most cases there are devices in that network that are pivotable. Your human machine interfaces in many cases are running on embedded Windows or Linux. Your actual engineering workstations are usually going to be Windows devices. So things where you can run something like an EDR or another endpoint solution to feed back into that platform and gain that visibility is it's just another point where you can try to catch a threat actor as they try to maybe move through the environment.
Yeah, I mean the actual people on the network can be a very small percentage of all your devices out there.
Yep.
They're all just artificial, everyone.
Well, and then using that, leveraging your partnerships with your security providers as well, not just security providers, but also the providers of the equipment themselves, using that to best understand what right looks like, because in many cases, you're secure, especially if it's a traditionally IT security focused vendor, which most of us are. We know what right looks like and what it doesn't look like generally in an IT environment, but not necessarily in an ICS or OT environment. Work with that partner to help them understand what is normally going to go on. In many cases, it's not well documented. A lot of times they don't know. You have an IT team who's working in conjunction with an OT team. those engineers on that OT side know exactly what they know how to do. They're not always communicating that to the IT guys. The IT guys don't know what they're doing. And so really working with your partnerships with your security providers and vendors, whatnot, to understand that broad picture is going to help everyone out in the end. It's something that we're seeing, trying to work through is do you have a network map, for instance? What devices, what subnets should be communicating with this environment and vice versa? A lot of times it's not really well documented. So you really leverage those partnerships to try to identify those gaps. It's very, very important.
I hate to be a speculator, but this whole Southwest Airlines thing seems a little suspicious, doesn't it?
I have not to speculate either. I've been watching how that's unfolded. They have not publicly released anything associated with a cyber attack. I do understand the hub and spoke versus point to point mechanism, which I do see as a viable thing. But you say you hate to be a speculator, but you have to speculate. It's
to be gone for this, be out for this long after the fact.
Yeah, it's a little fishy, but again, I'm going to rely on whatever the evidence points to and what they ultimately come out with as our regulars dig into them, and I'm sure there's going to be some more news to come from that front.
Yeah, just seems like a long time to recover.
Yes. Which is unfortunate for all those people who are grounded, thousands of miles from home in many cases. So,
what has been happening a lot in the last few years that's taken a long time to recover from? What do you think about that?
Right.
Mentioning, not saying that specifically, but what are you seeing? Trends in ransomware, up or down, sideways?
So we actually have seen it's been a little iffy. Normally I like to say that we do a great job, at least Rapid7 of stopping threat actors early in the attack chain, and we do a great job of that. What I have seen, I've noticed an uptick in cases where, and I'm sure some of the threat intelligence reports that will come out the coming year are probably going to kind of mimic that. But over the years we've seen decreasing dwell times from threat actors. Mm-hmm. And I personally have witnessed the same here, with our customers. The dwell times are drastically decreasing from where it's not a case of the threat actor. In most cases in the past that I've seen here at Rapid7 have been cases where the threat actor ingressed in some way where we didn't have visibility. They did things, they elevated privileges, they offline, dumped credentials, whatever. They gained legitimate access to an environment, and then we start seeing them when it's real bad, right? Going back to the 2020 and the Citrix stuff, I'll never forget that year. But that where you don't have great visibility is where they were coming from. We have seen some cases recently where they are coming in ways that we see them and we identify them fairly early, but they start the ransomware approach fairly early on, and so I think that's. I'm not going to speculate on whether that's going to continue to be a trend. It's been a trend year after year as the dwell time has decreased, but we've gone from where we're seeing it, matter of days or maybe 48 hours to a number of hours in some cases. Mm-hmm. So I think that their threat actors are becoming a little bit more brazen. And also, it's one of those things that the insurance industry is trying to tackle, right? Like one of the reasons that, it may be untenable to insure cyber attacks, or you have to be a little bit more stringent about what an organization has to do, because if everybody's going to get ransomed, and in many cases, you're going to be leveraging certain partnerships to negotiate a ransom by enacting your cyber insurance policy. Insurers and underwriters, they're going to be less interested in trying to cover you in those situations. If you haven't checked every box and then failed, then they're probably not going to insure you. And I say checked every box. I also like to caveat that with don't just try to check a box. When you're buying a solution or you're partnering with an organization, be a true partner, have true security in mind. Just because you have a cyber insurance policy that says you have to have these things in place, if you just go and pay a provider to do something and then ghost them whenever they're trying to reach out to you because they're identifying something in your environment because you really just bought it, check a box, that's really the wrong way to go. Absolutely, you do need to partner with those organizations because organizations like us, we're here to help. But we can only help you so much as you help us, and vice versa. So make it a true partnership. I throw that term out so much, but it is so important to actually be a partner with your vendors, because at the end of the day, like, seconds and minutes do matter, and you want to know what are they going to be able to do for you, and we need to be able to know that you're going to be able to take action when the time comes.
That is a really difficult chicken and egg question, keeping that balance right over the skill sets you have versus the information you may have to act on. It's a really difficult thing to figure out. It
reminds me of the Jerry Maguire, help me help you, right?
Exactly. It's absolutely, I mean, it really is true. Like it's one of those things where, ensuring if you're meeting with your services partner on whatever regular cadence, just simple things like ensuring your points of contact are up to date, can be the difference between having a threat actor get into your environment, your services provider identifies it, they reach out to you, and nobody actually gets that message because just the simple basics weren't, kept up to date. And it can be tough, right? Like, I understand organizations will have turnover. You're going to have new people coming in, taking those roles. It is definitely a really tough balancing act, but it's just something to, keep in mind as you work with those providers and those vendors, because it can make all the difference in the world.
As we, I guess, just wrapping up the IT Trendsetters discussion, Kirk, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we?
I've been wanting to say something about your I used to have a symbolic thing on those bookshelves behind you there. It's like the invisible pictures, or
it's the symbolic clean slate for the new starting off. So we'll see what happens. Like IT, I'm always looking for new trends. So we'll see what happens in the in the next year. So Lonnie, super nice to have you on. I guess, Kirk, any other final parting thoughts?
No, just customers are really looking to evaluate. There's only so many players that can really play that kind of independent role. You have your vendors that have security platforms already, the tools. So you either have to go the tool way or something independent of that. And I'd make sure I have Rapid7 on my short list of evaluation tools to give me that defense in depth and that ability to tie together potential multiple, this multi-SIM environment, for lack of a better term, because it's, I think it's going to be a reality for the common real big platforms that, they'll know more about their platform than you will, but then someone's got to manage all those different platforms, and some of them won't be necessarily the best cooperators, between when they have their own solution in a certain area and other business partners.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just, identifying those, where does that provider come into play and where do they stop? Those are definitely things to keep in mind. Whose responsibility is what, and understanding that delineation, and understanding where can they stop? Can they provide incident response services in time of need, or do you need to have a separate retainer? Does your cyber insurance provider require a specific, list of vendors to be able to do IR if you choose to invoke that cyber insurance policy? Identifying things like that early in the process and having that understanding is very important, because, again, minutes matter. Having to go and sign an SOW and bring somebody on board and have to do a handoff from your MDR provider to your whoever's going to actually take on the IR, like those things, they occur. But it's best to identify those kinds of things up front, so that maybe if you go with somebody like Rapid7, like, you could identify your cyber insurance policy. Are they on the list? Can you get them on the list? Because for us, we prefer, of course, to, once we identify something and move into that incident response, we can just keep rolling, and you don't have to, as a customer, don't have to wait. But we do want to always know, is that going to be something that you're going to have to do? So just that delineating factor and having that identified up front can save time, effort, money, reputation, all those kind of things.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much. To learn more about or watch other interviews of IT Trendsetter, you can go to centercom.com or to YouTube or Spotify to listen or watch these insightful interviews. Thanks, guys, for both commentary and joining today.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Lonnie.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.